My name is Wilhelm Vosse. I'm the director of the Social Science Research Institute, which is one of the two research institutes together with the Sophia University's Institute of Global Concern that is co-organizing today's symposium. I'm happy to see there's so much interest these days in international relations, global order, and regional world order. And it seems to increase almost on a daily basis. So when you prepare a symposium like this, as an organizer, you always want to have a topic which is kind of timely, but it seems this topic is very, very timely and changes and becomes even more important and an issue for discussions every day. I'm really pleased to see so many students. I'm sure there are other students still coming from upstairs, still finish up their lunch for the beginning of the keynote presentations today. So I would like you to welcome all of the students, and especially those who come from outside ICU. I know it's not always easy to find this place and to get to this place. It's a bit outside of the center of Tokyo, of course, so congratulations for making your way to ICU this afternoon. That's wonderful. So we titled this symposium today, The End of the Liberal World Order, ? And I'm not sure, but I hope there is still a question mark at the end of today when we finish discussions. So of course you want to be provocative, but I hope this still stays there. So as I said, today's symposium is co-organized with the Sophia Institute of Global Concern, and I will ask Professor Hasegawa, who's here in a few minutes, to say a few words in the beginning. It's a privilege, first of all, to have her here, and thank you very much for coming to ICU. But before I do that, and before I'm going to say a few more words about the symposium and the topic of today's symposium, I would like to ask the President of ICU, Professor HIbiya, to say a few words to you.
Thank you, Professor Vosse. Professor Vosse is one of the tallest person on campus, and I believe I am the shortest one on campus, so you see like nice diversity here. Yes, you have to come up.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Interesting contrast. Welcome all of you to ICU, especially those who come to this campus for the first time. We have very fortunate to have this spacious, verdant campus where students, faculty members, and staff interact with each other every day. And today we host this very timely symposium entitled The End of the Liberal World Order with a question mark. I happened to be in the United States on November 8th last year when that person was elected. And I shared all kinds of, I would say excitement, maybe disappointments, with many colleagues of mine in the States. And since then, I have been thinking about where the world is going, and I think the symposium like this today is one of the many ways to think more about the future of our life and also where the world of 21st century go from now on. Today, we are very, very happy to have two distinguished keynote speakers. Number one, Professor John Ikenberry from Princeton University and Professor Kiichi Fujiwara from the University of Tokyo. Thank you very much for joining us. And I see some familiar faces, our students, graduate students, and some new faces. So I hope you all are engaged in a lively discussion and enjoy the nice afternoon of intellectual activity. Thank you very much.
As I said before, so this is a co-organized symposium, and I'm really, really happy to have the pleasure and the privilege to welcome Professor Hasegawa, who is a member of the Sophia University's Institute of Global Concern, to say a few words to you.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'm very pleased to be here. I come every time there is a symposium. the Institute of Global Concern of Sophia University holds one symposium 1 year, and ICU another year, and again Sophia another year. So all the people that are here are very invited to come to our symposium too. This December 16, we're having a symposium, and we're thinking about talking about education, the OECD PISA problem. We were going to talk about this globalization and education and all these problems. But now, after what is happening in the US, we don't know what is going to happen by December, so they might be changes, but anyway, we are intending to talk about that topic. This program with ICU and Sophia has worked for 36 years already. It's very, here you have translation? No. Generally, we have translation in Sophia every year, so no matter if you speak Japanese or English, there is a translation. So I hope you have taken note of the day we're having our symposium this year, and I send you, I hope, the best for this discussion of today in behalf of the Institute of Global Concern of Sophia University.
Very much, Professor Hasegawa, for coming here today. So this was all planned a little bit, or some changes over the last moment in terms of the time of this symposium. So as I said, when we began to planning for this symposium, reflecting on growing challenges and the possible end of the world system as we know it, we started this last year. This was, among others, triggered by political decisions and economic breakdowns that we had seen mid to long-term societal transitions in Europe, but also in Asia, and apparently growing public support for anti-global and anti-liberal, anti-elite, often xenophobic and nationalist sentiment in many Western countries, which have so far been considered the barrel holders for open societies with liberal values, i.e. Europe, of course, Australia, New Zealand, Japan and Korea, and of course all countries in North America. The recent election, of course, and this is probably what brought some of you here, of Donald Trump to the American presidency, is like another step, another symbol that reflects a growing uncertainty about our future, and reflects that there seem to be a lot of people and citizens around the world that have questions about this liberal world order. So, but President Trump is really just an indicator of this development. Over the last year, we had the decision in the UK to leave the European Union, electoral success of populist leaders and political parties in Poland, in Hungary as well, growing support for anti-Muslim and my country first politicians in the Netherlands, a country that is generally perceived as a liberal and open-minded one, the likely success, at least in the first round, of Marine Le Pen at the elections in France, and the relative success of openly racist party in German state elections as well. Not yet at the national level, but we have to see. So we have elections in France later this year and in Germany as well. And whether that means the end of the European project, we have to see about that. So one element in many of these Western countries is disillusionment. Political business elites, international organizations like the EU, but maybe even the United Nations as well. And for a while, of course, while for many ordinary citizens this is all relatively new, within international relations, this debate has been going on much longer than that. And John Ikenberry, among others, is one of the representatives obviously of the liberal world order, but also someone who has written quite extensively about the challenges to this international world order. And this world order, as he describes it, is characterized by open trade, multilateralism, alliances, partnerships, democratic solidarity, human rights, and American hegemonic leadership. These were all ideas enshrined in this order. 2011, he published the latest book titled The Liberal Leviathan, and basically focusing and emphasizing the point that this system, while depending very much on the United States, still has developed forward in lots of ways and has become more an independent model that is now supported by many other countries around the world. And he argues that it's in some way a crisis of American-led international order, but it's a crisis of authority in some sense. And when we see what happened over the last week in particular, some of us within the United States, but also, of course, outside the United States, are beginning to question to what degree the United States is still the pillar of this development and a pillar of the liberal world order, and whether the United States can be this liberal hegemon, or, as you described in 2011, this benevolent hegemon, right? How benevolent the United States still is today is, of course, still in question. We have to see. It's still early days, but of course there are many questions on many people's mind whether the American hegemonic leadership will continue the way it has over the last 6 or 7 decades. So the core argument, John's argument, is that this international liberal order is easier to join and harder to overturn. So it works for everyone. It works for democratic and liberal states, but it also works for less democratic, non-democratic states in the same way. So even countries that do not necessarily share the same cultural values still benefit from this system quite significantly. But this system is, of course, based on rule of law, transparent global governance to some degree, so that people can kind of understand what is actually going on. Interest and engagement in other parts of the world. So the opposite of this my country first policy that we have seen over the last few weeks. It's based on cooperation, mutual understanding, respect in words and deeds. 2 days ago, I came around an article that Robert Kagan, the famous basically neo-conservative thinker who became quite well known during the Bush era. He just contributed a chapter to the book The World America Made, which is, or he wrote among others this book. He of course became famous for Of Paradise and Power. So two different worlds, kind of the Europeans and the Americans obviously have a different view, and this reflects the invasion of Afghanistan and especially Iraq. And so he wrote an article here and a book that's published by Michael Handel, and his article is titled The Twilight of the Liberal World Order, in which which actually comes out officially tomorrow. And he writes that the liberal world order that has held sway over international affairs for the past 7 decades has been fragmenting under the pressure of systematic economic stresses, growing tribalism and nationalism, and a general loss of confidence in established international and national institutions. And many might argue, and I might be some of them, that one reason of this disillusionment is probably his support for the Bush administration and the repercussions of those policies in the earlier part of the last decade. But he concludes that if history is any guide, the next 4 years are the critical inflection point. And he talks obviously about the election of Donald Trump. The rest of the world will take its cues from the early actions of the new administration. And obviously this was written before Donald Trump actually came into power. If the next president governs as he ran, which is to say he pursues a course designed to secure only America's national or narrow interests, accommodates the ambitions of the great powers, ceases to regard international economic policy in terms of global order, but only in terms of America's bottom line, narrowly construed, and generally ceases to place a high priority on reassuring allies and partners in the world's principal strategic theater, then the collapse of the world order, with all that entails, may not be far off. And this is written not by a liberalist, but by a neocon, definitely. And so there are a lot of questions, of course, which triggered the preparation for a symposium like this. So the undermining of liberal values, and this is not an abstract concept, but of people around the world. The question, is public support for liberal values and the liberal world order declining in the West? We know it had always had a hard time in many other countries, of course, but the West was usually the barrel hole and the pillar of these values. Did G7, G20, or OECD countries and their people support the liberal world order because it was beneficial for them, economically, in some way, trickle-down economics, or because they really believed in liberal values? And that is a big question. This question was raised, of course, in early post-war by early post-war political comparatists like Gabriel Almond and Sidney Verber in the civic culture in the 1950s, and in 1965 by the American political scientist David Easton, when he distinguished between diffuse and specific system support in explaining the stability of democracies. So it's this question whether people support democratic or liberal values because they benefit, because their income is rising, because their working hours go down and their life benefits, or do they support democratic systems because they support liberal values? So a diffuse system support, I support a democracy no matter what, and not just because it delivers. And of course it has delivered to the West in particular. And the third one, of course, which is probably somewhat different today than it was 10 years ago, is the role of social media. Twitter, other social media, obviously, famously Donald Trump, famous medium nowadays is Twitter, but it's not only that, it's also the ability of many groups to spread false information, false news, rumors around the world, and they didn't have this ability 10 years ago. So one might wonder, or we might have to wonder, how significant is this? Is this just a side effect of something else? How significant is this really in the world today? So at the end, so we put this here as a question mark, the end of the liberal world order, because no one of us who prepares this thinks it will actually end right now, but it's definitely under a lot of stress. And, well, there might be two scenarios of the kind of world that we might see maybe in a few months or maybe in a few years. One might be that this is just temporal, that the United States will somehow come back to the table and will again become basically a strong supporter and this liberal hegemon that it has been over the last 70 years. Or is it possible that other countries, like China, for example, seeing Xi Jinping speaking at Davos a week ago, is that an indication, question mark? So is the U.S. really retreating to support for non-liberal norms and political rules, or undermining legitimacy of the international institutions? So is Brexit the stress that the European Union is currently facing is just temporal? This will all be fine because people will realize how important these institutions are, or not? So some might wonder, are we maybe in 1910 or before the beginning of the First World War? Oftentimes people compare this with the 1930s, and some historians have argued, well, people compare everything with the 1930s because that's the only historical period that everyone knows. And not so much the 1910s, or a time after a long period of peace where we all assume, well, everything will be fine. It has been fine for the last 70 years, so why should we worry too much about this? So the title is The End of the Liberal World Order, but we don't just only want to look at the world at large. We also would like to look at the repercussions on Asia and the Asia Pacific. Let me briefly introduce the two keynote speakers this afternoon, and then I will tell you a bit more about how we are going to go along. So first of all, it's John Ikenberry. He's one of these people who doesn't really need any introduction in most cases. He's the Albert G. Miliband Professor of Politics and International Affairs at Princeton University in the Department of Politics at the Woodrow Wilson School. There, he's also the director of the Princeton Center for International Security Studies. He was a visiting fellow in Oxford, where actually I saw you briefly, and I saw a talk of you as well, and I was very impressed about the debate that we had in Oxford as well. After that, maybe two books that I'd like to briefly introduce here is, of course, After Victory, Institutions, Strategic Restraints, and the Rebuilding of Order After Major Wars, in which he kind of coined this phrase of the benevolent hegemon. Again, even then, many in Europe kind of questioned that and found that the focus on the United States was too strong. But in principle, the idea of a liberal order with imperial ambitions, or it's another book, Liberal Order and Imperial Ambitions is another one, American Power and International Order, and the Crisis of American Foreign Policy. The most recent one, as I just mentioned, is the Liberal Leviathan, The Origins and Crisis of Transformations in the American System, in which he analyzed the problems of the liberal world order we will see today. So he argues that the Liberal Leviathan is basically an American-led international order, is in crisis, and the rise of non-Western developing states are gaining in the power and influence. Of course, this is China, this is India, but the global system of institution, alliances, and partnership still remains. And I hope it does, but of course, this is very much a question that is probably different even from 2 or 3 years ago, when we discussed this more theoretically and academically, but now the system really seems to be even more in crisis. The second keynote speaker, I'm really happy to see again, is Kiichi Fujiwara. Many of you know him, of course. He's not only a professor, a teacher in international politics and Southeast Asian studies at the Faculty of Law and at the University of Tokyo. But so he's not only a scholar of international relations and international relations of Asia and the US and Japanese foreign policy, but as well as in peace and reconciliation, but also a public intellectual of the best kind who writes columns, or whose columns regularly appear in foreign newspapers. He's reporting on CNN and BBC and regularly on Japanese TV as well. Let me just mention 2 or 3 of his books. Very influential are the 20th Century Global System, 6 volumes about the global international order. But also books like Remembering the War or A Democratic Empire, but also Building Peace. So the focus here is also on reconciliation. And of course, behind a lot of this is a rise of a certain level of nationalism, a rise of not just anti-foreigner sentiment, and this is particularly, of course, prominent in East Asia. We have, of course, the difficult relationship between Japan and China, between Japan and Korea. And so there are a lot of aspects, of course, that I think we would like to discuss a bit more when it comes to what repercussions this might have on Southeast Asia and what Southeast Asia could do differently. And, of course, the major changes, I would say, major changes in Japanese foreign policy over the last 4 years under Prime Minister Abe. I think I hope you agree that I think these changes are the most fundamental changes that Japan has seen over the last 7 decades. There have been other changes before, but these changes have been quite fundamental, and so we have to kind of ask the question where this leads Japan and what role Japan might play here. I'm not going to give a speech here. This is just to raise some of the questions that we had when we planned this. So could you give the program, go back to the program page? So we have two keynote presentations today. No, on this one? There's the one with the program on it, which you might have in front of you or not. Go back. That one. So we have two keynote speeches here, starting from 2 o'clock. We have about 75 minutes. Depending on the time, the idea is that John said you want to speak for maybe about 50, 55 minutes. And if you agree to maybe ask some questions from the audience. So I really would like to involve the audience here as well to ask questions, because these are, of course, also things that are still very much in discussion, in debate. Then right after that, without a coffee break, we move on to the second keynote presentations from Kiji Fujiwara. Again, if you agree to open the floor for questions, so this is an opportunity for you as students and guests to ask questions about this as well. Then we have a short coffee break. And then 3, what we call kind of response papers, not really a discussant paper. So they will talk about certain aspects, especially when it comes to East Asia or the Asia Pacific, by Paul Mitford, Tom Wilkins, and Robin Harding, who's going to join us very soon from the Financial Times. And I'm going to introduce those speakers after the coffee break. And in the end, from 5:30, we have like a round table. So we are going to have chairs here, and I invite you, again, to ask questions. Possibly, but maybe more, it could also be a discussion among us as well. So again, thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I'm looking forward to interesting presentations and interesting debates. Thank you very much. Okay, John, can I ask you?